Hello and assalamu alaikum everyone, and a very warm welcome to ALUMS Chat Season 2. We're back with episode 8, and I'm so excited to introduce you to our guest today. I have known her personally for quite a few years, being in the LUMS circle, and this is someone who has come back full circle because she's a full-time faculty member at the law school. But she's also someone who has played many roles at LUMS. She's worn many different hats. She's a lesson in humility, as I just told her, because she is somebody who's accomplished so much since her graduation in 2008 from the BA-LL.B class. But this is somebody who feels like your next door neighbor, who feels like your best friend. And I'm so excited for our conversation today because she's really been a pioneer in introducing a lot to the legal education that LUMS brings forth and LUMS in turn brings to our national landscape. She pioneered the street law program at LUMS. She was a huge hand in bringing the LUMS Law Clinic into play this year. She's mentoring the next generation of lawyers. Her students look up to her. I think many aspiring lawyers will look up to her. And I think this conversation is going to be very insightful because I've never gotten the chance to have such a conversation. So please join me in welcoming Angbeen Atif Mirza from BA-LL.B 2008.
Thank you. That's very generous. Thanks, Laura.
Angbeen, thank you so much for being here. Angbeen, like I said, you've come full circle. You are an assistant professor of practice at SASOL. You were the former faculty director at the Office of Accessibility and Inclusion. A lot to dive into there as well. But you're, from the very early classes of the law school at LUMS, from the first class, right? Yeah. So you've really seen the evolution
of the law school, particularly.
Of the law school, particularly. Yeah. You've kind of really seen the last more than a decade of LUMS very closely.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about getting to LUMS, how you actually got to your undergraduate at LUMS. Was that planned? What's the story behind that? And then tell me a little bit about your time at LUMS.
Right. So my story about getting to LUMS is quite underwhelming. It was the obvious next step that I aspired to take. And so in my A-levels, I applied. I wasn't entirely sure of what I wanted to do. There was a vague idea at that time that I wanted to be a lawyer in the future, but LUMS did not have a law school at the time. So without thinking too much about it, all my friends were applying to LUMS, and I thought social sciences would be a good base to set me up to become a lawyer eventually. But that was all very gray. And that's how I ended up here. And I was enrolled in the 4-year, it used to be a social science degree.
Okay.
We didn't have streams at the time. It was just a bachelor's in social science. And I was also pursuing a minor in computer science. And that was going very well. I had a good time. And then I had a semester left. It used to be quarters back then. And the law school was offered to the batch after me. So I had already done 3 years of my undergrad, 3.5 years. But then I went and spoke to the people at the law department at the time. And they said, what difference does it make if you are, my head of department at the time said, if I'm 36 or 38, it makes no big difference to my life. So if you really want to be a lawyer, then here's a program and you could just switch. And because my next plan was so vague at the time, that I thought it was fantastic. And I did switch. So I did 6 years of undergrad at LUMS. I did a 3-year BA and a 3-year LL.B instead of 5. And I graduated in 2008 as the first class.
I mean, I think you made a very good decision.
I think so, yeah.
So you were interested in law before that.
Yes,
it was always on your mind.
Yes, it was.
What was the motivation behind that?
I think it was A-level law.
Okay.
Which is usually, senior lawyers will tell you that A-level law is not a good idea if you want to become a lawyer. But I think for me, it was what helped me decide that I wanted to be a lawyer. Law is something that if at some level interests everybody because it affects everybody. It's very relatable. And in A-level law, you get a feel of what it's like, what practice might be like, but also what theory and jurisprudence is like. So it was very interesting for me. I had a bunch of really great teachers. I had various teachers, in fact. But that was where I think my decision was kind of made and then solidified in 2005.
I think it was almost cosmic for you because during your time, it was introduced.
It wasn't even on the cards when I joined. It wasn't public information that there would be a law school at all.
And what was that 3-year LL.B like? You know, being that first class.
Yeah.
What's your best memory of it? What do you look back on and you think that this is something that really shaped my career?
I think the most fantastic thing about being the first class was that we were the guinea pig class, right? So everybody was doing their absolute best, which at the time felt like a lot of work because we had readings and readings. And I can only imagine giving those readings to my students these days, but that's fine. So I think A, just the kind of effort that went into the degree. B, we were a class of 18 people. Our student and our faculty ratio was fantastic. We had fantastic faculty. I think they really shaped the kind of lawyer that I decided to become. And also I think the kind of person I decided to become. And some faculty are now peers, you know, they're colleagues, and that's also a really fantastic experience for me. Like particularly Dr. Sadaf Aziz, who was a founding faculty member. She was my faculty advisor. Some of her courses, I think, shaped the direction that I took. For instance, Moin Chima and Sadaf Aziz taught us something called Law and Social Justice. And I think it was one of the foundational courses of my law school experience. The law degree was actually very strongly focused on a community service it had a community service bent. All the courses that we took had a critical angle that we didn't realize at the time, but I think it really shaped who we became eventually in the future. After my master's, I went back to Karachi. I worked in legal aid, but then when I came back to Lahore, by then it was kind of very natural for me to want to come back to the law school.
And was teaching always on the cards for you? Had you thought about that?
Not full-time teaching. I've been teaching adjunct since I finished my master's. In Karachi, I was teaching at Hamdard School of Law. I started teaching as an adjunct in 2012 in the law school. And then eventually it became a part-time position that Dr. Martin kind of created for me. That was very nice of him. And then when OAI came about, then Dr. Kamran Astar suggested that I should now apply for a full-time position. So formally, I became a full-time faculty member in 2020.
You know, your journey makes a lot of sense because you are somebody who, even today, I think really combines academia with a passion for real-world impact. You know, that's really all the programs that you've pioneered, that you work towards, blend those two things.
Yeah.
And your experience, you know, kind of speaks to that. So was this like an influence of your time at LUMS? Is this something that evolved? How did this happen, academia and world?
So there's a very concrete kind of time where we didn't have clinics. We didn't even know what clinics were. And globally, clinics are not a recent phenomenon, but I think in our part of the world, they might be a little bit more recent than other parts of the world, I'd say. So back in 2011, when I was teaching at Hamdard in Karachi, the Open Society Foundation made a trip. And this was a time when OSF was really promoting clinical legal education in various parts of the world. So they brought these inspirational clinical faculty members with them from South Africa, from Turkey, from Budapest. And they hosted a workshop for all the law schools across the country. I was coming from Hamdard at the time, but it was hosted by LUMS, naturally. And at that time, I went back to Hamdard and we designed a street law clinic for the Hamdard School of Law inside the Karachi prisons with the juveniles. And this was easy for us because the dean of the law school at the time in Hamdard was also the chairperson of the government committee for the welfare of prisoners. So it was very seamless. It was very easy to get permission. Prison permission is a big deal, as you might know. I designed that program and I was just convinced, because of the real world impact of the clinical model, that clinics were something that I wanted to be engaged with for the rest of my life. Because I've been a practitioner. I was a practitioner for like 7 or 8 years before I stepped away from it. And I think the transition to academia has been made possible and also enjoyable for me because of my ability to still feel like I have a connection with the clinical world or my community, whatever community I choose. So eventually the street law program in Karachi was not run by me. My family moved back to Lahore. But my class fellow, Omar Bashir Maniar, from the first class of the LUMS Law School, he ran the program with other faculty in Hamdard, and I came back to Lahore. I was adjunct, so obviously I wasn't a very important voice at all. But I pitched it repeatedly to Dr. Martin Lau. I think it's 2016 or 17. He said, why don't you run it as a student society activity? Run it with LPS, the Law and Politics Society.
Okay.
And that's it. We took that.
That's how it happened.
Yeah, and we ran with it. Yeah, as much as we could.
And it turned into what it's become.
Course now. Yeah, now
it's a full-time course now, right?
Yes, yes.
So, like, how do you find live client, interaction and working in this sort of real-world approach with students? How do you find that approach to be different from sort of the traditional legal education approach?
Well, the obvious thing is that they are able to see impact. They're able to, I think, get controlled exposure to the kind of impact that their legal work could have. Law school teaching across the world is very heavily focused on a particular type of client. It's a rich client, I'll say. It's a client whose life is generally speaking okay, and he's had a problem with the law, he wants to sell his car, they want to get a divorce. Some problem has occurred, and you will step in as a lawyer, and you will solve their problem, and their life will go back to normal. But our communities are not like that. Especially the clinical communities are generally socioeconomically disadvantaged communities. Poor people are in a constant run-in with the law, right? If you look abroad in welfare states, there's a constant exchange with the welfare system. But even if you were to look here, there's a constant exchange with the ability to go to a hospital and get treatment, with the ability to file a case and get anything, or get a house on rent and be treated fairly. I mean, the problems are nonstop. And consequently, the engagement with the law is also nonstop and in a very different capacity than the way that we train our law students across the world. It's not a LUMS thing, it's just the way law schools are. And so I think clinical legal education allows students to step out of that zone for a little while and also gain exposure to the other kinds of impact that we could potentially have, if not as a full-time occupation, but as something that we could keep in mind when we graduate and go on with our lives.
Which ties in with your, being a champion of access and a champion of justice, really.
Well, it is a never-ending process. I mean, anything we do is a drop in the ocean, hardly.
I have to ask you, though, that, like I said, social justice is something that has sort of overlapped in your experience as a student, as a faculty member, and then also as when you were the faculty director, right, at the Office of Accessibility and Inclusion at LUMS, which was then also a newer center. It was a newer office when it was formed. So tell me a little bit about that experience, running a space like that at LUMS, and what kind of challenges did you face, or what do you think are areas where we've now stepped into the next sort of improved direction over the years?
We started in January, in 2020, March, we shut down for COVID, after which the Me Too movement came to LUMS in July. So that was really stressful. I remember Dr. Farhat and I and Dr. Arshad, we had to kind of deal with, there were town halls, if you remember.
I do remember.
A lot of people came out with a lot of allegations, and not all of those allegations, unfortunately, translated into complaints at the harassment office. Because harassment is the kind of thing that it always kind of comes with the trust deficit. And so it's an ongoing task for us at the harassment committee as well to gain that trust. Because even if students or faculty or staff can be assured that everything is confidential, there still can be fear of retaliation or repercussion. So that's always going to be, I think, a difficult topic and a difficult thing for students and complainants, let's say, to manage.
As you said, it was formed in 2020, so there's still...
still new.
Work still being done, still miles to go. I think it's very interesting that as you said, that your time overlapped with the Me Too movement, I think, because that is a very difficult space to be in. And also, I know that you're also on the board for the Digital Rights Foundation. And that really overlaps over here, I have to tell you.
It does,
because you're looking at a lot of like inclusion, cyber rights and inclusion rights for women, all of that comes into that space. Just tell me a little bit about your experience working in a space like that.
I think these are important. Like gender, online harassment defines the challenge, I think. I think conducting cases online was difficult, and all the regular challenges of COVID applied manifold over here, right? If people don't have internet access, if people are sitting in a space where they don't have the privacy to be able to talk, and you have to take a case and move forward with it. So it was, and I think that even socioeconomic difference is exaggerated, or it was in COVID, right? Because of the access that people have to privacy and internet spaces. So I guess I'll just say it was very challenging, and I'm glad that it's over. I think आप जितना भी काम कर लो, harassment पे, there's always much more to be done. As an academic institution, something that I felt really challenged by when I was at OAI was when there is a break of trust between two communities or two people, and somebody has made a very big mistake. As an academic institution, our ideal goal is to bring people back, right? To guide people, to educate people on how to go forward. Even though the mistakes in this type of situation are very grave and can also be argued that they aren't always mistakes, right? People break with societal rules. And one thing is to penalize them to the point that you cut them off, which is sometimes definitely warranted. I'm not making a case for anything like that here. But I also think that sometimes there are genuine mistakes. And we need to be able to create a culture where we can have actual conversation on learning and improving who we are.
Yeah.
We should be able to say that, we were able to make an intervention in many people's lives, so that when they graduated, they were really citizens who were ready to kind of lead. And I think that that's a struggle. And I don't know, I don't have the answer. But these are young adults, they're not kids.
Yeah.
And so we should collectively, as the community, students, staff, faculty, everybody, we should be able to do more to create a more, I think, respectful community.
How do you feel about this? Looking ahead, though, do you think Pakistan is making progress? Are you optimistic?
No, no, I'm not.
You're not.
I'm not, because sometimes I feel that by the time the students reach us, it's too late. So ये बातें आपको schools में करनी है.
पहले करनी है,
right? But like it's easy for me to say that. I don't pass the buck on to schools. Say आप लोगों ने गलती कर दी, ये नहीं है. ऐसे भी नहीं हो सकता. But it's partly true. It is partly true. Schools are also academic institutions. It's not just getting your grades, right? It is education. इसको हम उर्दू में तरबियत कहते हैं. तरबियत करनी है ना. So हमारे यहाँ तो बच्चे आते हैं, they are adults, they're 18, and they're not. Like we know that brain development finishes at 25. So we still have all those years actually. Like your frontal cortex is still developing. But I think the reason we fail as a society larger, but also at LUMS, is that it's a lot of time and effort. OAI is probably one of our smallest departments on campus. And it exists, and that's a big deal, it does exist. But if we really want to be able to engage in meaningful conversation between and amongst students, then it can't just be 5 people sitting in an office who have to do it. Or it can't also just be LUMS as one academic institution. So I do think that it's a school curriculum question. But jab tak wo nahi hota, at least, I think about it at the law school level. In clinical legal education, there are lots of modules where, students just sit and even ethical conversations are conversations about inclusion as well, right? That's an ethical conversation about what it means to be an ethical citizen, an ethical lawyer. It's not just my duty to my client, it's also my duty to myself or my duty to my peers or myself as a citizen. So there are modules that I keep thinking about, but in practice, just being able to implement those is still kind of a pipe dream because there's just too much to do, right? One person or any person on campus has too much to do.
But really, honestly, if I take that conversation, also, if I take that thread forward, I mean, as a lawyer, honestly, really, and as someone who's passionate about social justice, and I would say access to justice, right? That's like the theme of all the areas of your life. What does it personally mean to you? What is access to justice?
I don't know where to begin. And when you say this, I have to confess that do I even think to myself about what does access to justice mean? Because it permeates every single aspect of our life, right? The ability to go to a school where you are taught well is access to justice, or the ability to go, get a medical appointment at a hospital. it's just, and these are very practical things. And I want to be able to give you some very lofty theoretical answer and access to just, I can't do it.
What would you say to aspiring lawyers and also just young people who are interested in working towards any kind of social justice or who want to work at the intersection of justice?
Yeah. Ekta, I want to say very generous, your description of what I'm doing, but I think that all young people already have a sense of who they think their community is, right? Har bande ki community. Some people are people who work in online spaces. Some people work with actual communities who are underserved. Everybody has a community. You don't have to be a lawyer. You can be a writer. You can be anything in the world. And I think that just being very mindful of who your community is and what it is that you aim to do or what it is that is your responsibility to that community is something that people should just, I think, engage with at a personal level. And the rest is for all of us to figure out on our own, I guess.
What would you, when you look back on your time as a student at LUMS, so we know that you're somebody who was always interested in law, but what's something that you look back on and you think, or you ever wish that you would have known, or was something you could tell the younger Angbeen? Is there anything like that?
I think something that one of my earlier employers, Justice Nasir Zahid, he's a retired judge of the Supreme Court, who was the dean of the law school at Hamdard, he said, I think just do your bit is the advice. It doesn't matter because when you start, or even when you're 20, 25 years into your profession, you realize you're not actually making much of a difference. You're not, because the problem is just so huge and whatever you do is a small drop, but just keep adding your drop is my advice. It's something that he said to me once because he was working with the prisons, the women in prisons in Karachi, and at the time it really felt like there's so much to be done and there's so few of us. But fast forward 5 or 6 years from when we were having this conversation, every single prison in all of Sindh has a free legal aid set up. So every single prisoner who needs a free lawyer has a free lawyer.
That's wonderful.
So, yeah, and I'm very happy to say that, part of my life was spent working with the juvenile jail as one of those lawyers. It was a very meaningful time. But I think the lesson that I've taken from what he said was just keep adding your little drop in the ocean, and that's okay.
After you did your LL.B at LUMS, from that earliest class, you went on to do your LL.M as well.
Yeah.
You went to the US, you went to Michigan.
Yeah.
That's also a huge question mark for a lot of students and people even who started their careers of going towards that graduate degree. Should we not? And I know थोड़ा सा वक्त का फर्क अब आ गया है. अब तो पाकिस्तान छोड़ने का भी बहुत बड़ा एक question mark होता है. तो I'll combine those. Can you tell me a little bit about what your thinking process was? How did you end up at Michigan doing an LL.M? And then what would you say to younger people who are debating that question also today?
A master's is a good way, I suppose, of trying to enter a new market, but it doesn't guarantee that you're going to, because most people go to the United States for their masters. The US doesn't allow everybody to sit for the bar exam in every state. So if you have a master's degree from the United States, the state of New York and the state of California will allow you to sit for their bar exam. If you qualify the bar exam, you can practice in those states. Eventually, and I think now there's another state, it's been many years since I've done this, and eventually I think you can move across states, but that's kind of the trajectory which many of our alumni have done now. But when I give people advice for their masters, I do encourage them to spend some time figuring out what they want from their legal practice or their career before going on to do your masters. I think that I found the masters to be a very enjoyable time to study what I wanted to study, right? And that's what I tell students. It's not that if I go into a master's in intellectual property law, I'll become an expert. It's a one-year master's degree. It's not. But what it's going to give me is exposure to a lot of different mindsets, different, theoretical bases, like different modes of learning. I will learn a lot inside and outside the classroom, and that will be very beneficial for me. But it's not crucial to my legal practice. It's a lot of hard work, which I imagine when you go into litigation, you're willing to put in. But the lack of control on how do you shape your case or the process, the progress of that case can be very frustrating. And it is long, litigation is long hours. I'm sure corporate is as well. So it's long hours, it's one-day weekends. So in a couple of years, you do feel burnt out. And a master's is a good break.
Good time to go.
Yeah.
I think that's very good advice. The students will thank you. All right, and honestly, I think I've picked your brain a lot about, the nitty-gritties of the legal aspect of your career and your thinking process, and you've been very generous with your honesty. But I want to ask you something very personal, because this is something I've thought about, which is that, like I said, when I was introducing you, Angbeen, I feel that you do a lot of work. You wear a lot of hats. You're teaching, you're doing you're introducing new programs. You were a faculty director. You have a family. I know you have kids. So that's what I want the sort of culmination of my conversation with you to be, which is, tell me a little bit about the secret sauce to doing so much. How do you have so much on your plate?
Now I have to make sure that nobody in my family hears this because there's a narrative about how I'm so busy all the time. But my response, what else am I supposed to be like? I said,
how do you manage it? But how do you manage it?
I think barely. I've not everything is done. I think some years ago, I came to the realization that if I want to do what I want to do, then I can't always aim for it to be perfect by my own standards, obviously, because the objective standards so वो नहीं होगा. But जो काम हो जाए वो अच्छा है. I also, before the kids, I felt like आप चीजें add कर लो अपने agenda में तो हो जाती हैं. Like somehow you manage. You'll cry through some of it, but you'll manage, right? You'll cry before your deadlines, but it'll happen. It's a little bit harder with the kids because they're very difficult to. It's unfair and difficult to expect them to move on my timeline because they don't. I think there's a sense that I'm doing a lot of things, but a lot of things are very streamlined, right? Like I teach when my kids are in school. I must tell you that it's always a subpar result. But that's, I think, life. And for me, that's life.
I think it's a really good lesson. I mean, you're using the word subpar. I would not use that word. But I think that the lesson here is, that you're streamlining things. And I think what you said earlier about how not always aiming for perfection and getting getting the work done.
I will get nothing done if I want to make everything perfect. नहीं होगा मुझसे फिर कुछ भी नहीं होगा actually.
But I think that's a really good lesson because Angbeen is an example of getting a lot done. So
yeah, sure. I'll take that. Work is done.
I think that's a great note to sum up the conversation. Like I said, Angbeen is a huge lesson in humility, but do not take her for her humor or her humility. I think that, like I said, the lesson here is that, mashallah, it's a story of hard work and also, a story of having a direction. And I think that we all really learned that. Thank you so much, Angbeen.
It's my pleasure. Thanks
for this conversation. Thank you so much, and take care, everyone. See you in the next episode. Allah Hafiz.